So our human manure system is really simple. It's based on Joel Jenkins' Human Manure Handbook. A 5-gallon bucket and a container of sawdust, which is just sawdust. And the idea being that when the bucket's empty, when you're getting ready to use a bucket for the first time, I take sawdust and I put about this much sawdust on the bottom of the bucket, and that's so things don't stick to the bottom of the bucket. So when you dump it, everything comes out at once. And then you go to the bathroom. When you're done going to the bathroom, you cover it with sawdust, put a nice good covering of sawdust on, and just do that all the way up until the bucket's full. And then what we do is we empty the bucket then into a human manure composting system, which is almost the same system that you use for composting vegetable matter, in that it's, you know, the lasagna method. The idea being that a combination of heat and air will break down the contaminants and the pathogens and the human waste, and when you're done, what you have is soil. Really, you know, if you do it right, when you're done composting, when you reach in to see how your compost is doing, you should get this really deep, rich, kind of reddish soil that when you rub it together in your hands, sticks to your hands. It has no smell. I mean, we're standing right here, and there's no odor associated with it. The only odor you ever get out of these things is that, and it's one of the reasons why we don't do it, is that if you urinate in the bucket, then you end up with an odor. The odor problem is really the urine, and if you're doing this outside in your house, you may not care. Our biggest concern isn't not only the odor, but it's also volume. That it fills the bucket quicker to urinate in the bucket. So we have a separate urine bucket. And eventually what we'll do is we'll plumb this so that the urine goes down to a bucket that's in the storage compartment. And then you can use that urine for doing things like watering around, you know, your trees, mixing it 10% urine, 90% water, and introducing it into your soil to help introduce some nutrients into the soil. And lately I just learned that there's all kinds of different things you can use for the covering. When I started this whole project, we were using rice hulls, and that's because rice hulls were easily available in California. And at one point we switched to coffee hulls, and that's because we met a coffee roaster and he gave us all the coffee hulls we could want. And most of the time we use sawdust because rice hulls and coffee hulls can be hard to get. Sawdust is plentiful and free. I'll probably go to a place here in Minneapolis while I'm here and go get some sawdust. The best sawdust to use is fresh sawdust that's been cut recently, like within a week, because the fresh sawdust still has all the sugars that's in the wood, and the sugars that's in the sawdust, when it mixes with the manure, breaks it down quicker. And if you're doing this at home, if you take some sawdust and you make sure you get some of this neat bark stuff in it, this bark, as it breaks down the manure and breaks down into the manure, almost instantly begins creating humus. So that just makes, you know, just intensifies your composting process and intensifies the quality of your soil.
I tried using coffee hulls recently in mine. It seemed like something was wrong. I was attracting a lot of flies. But maybe that's because we also sometimes would urinate in there.
That could be too, and coffee hulls are a lot lighter than sawdust, so you really have to cover.
Yeah.
You know, it probably takes, you know, that's another thing with the coffee hull and the rice hulls, is you end up using more of that material than you would end up using sawdust.
So yeah, I'm no back to sawdust.
And I know of at least one place here in Minneapolis I can just go to and, you know, go ask them for sawdust, and they start handing you bags of it. Oh, not a 5-gallon bucket. I look disappointed. And, you know, Joel Jenkins has been doing this in a suburb in western Pennsylvania for 30-some years now, and certainly his neighbors would have let him know if there was any problems associated with it. The biggest problem with human manure is that he tried to introduce human manure to Mongolia. In Mongolia, they eat very little vegetables because they can't grow many vegetables, so there's not a lot of vegetable matter around to cover the compost with, and there's not a lot of straw in that around. So really, and the weather gets really cold, so people were giving up because nothing was going on with their compost. They didn't have enough materials to cover it, and then every winter it would simply freeze into a block of ice. And so he discovered that there was, because you know, the idea was that you can do this anywhere.
There are limitations.
There are limitations to it.